You ever notice something? In a stadium, a concert, or even in the middle of traffic, the noise can drown you out. The world is loud. Everyone's shouting their story. Everyone's demanding to be heard. But then you see it. You see a Muslim bow his head, place his forehead on the ground, lips moving softly, almost like a whisper. And suddenly, the loudest person in the room isn't the one screaming. It's the one praying in silence. Why do they pray in silence even when the crowd is buzzing all around them? Because silence isn't weakness. Silence isn't emptiness. Silence is discipline. Silence is a shield against distraction. And when you can connect with the Creator in the middle of chaos, that's real strength. See, prayer is not for the crowd. It's not for the cameras. It's not for applause. Prayer is for the soul, and the soul doesn't need noise. It needs peace. And in those quiet words, those whispered verses, there is a conversation going on. Not with the people around, not with the world, but with the one who created the world. And when you master that silence, you realize something powerful: you're never really alone. Even in a crowd of thousands, when your lips move softly in remembrance, you are locked into something greater. That's why the prayer is done quietly. It's humility, it's sincerity, it's focus. So when you see someone praying in silence, don't mistake it for weakness. Don't mistake it for isolation. That silence is their strength. That silence is their power. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is exactly what we all need in a world that never stops talking. Now let me ask you, what's drowning out your silence today? What's keeping you from finding that quiet connection, that moment where the world fades and your soul speaks? Think about it. Because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one you can't hear. You see, silence has a way of confusing people. Most folks think silence means you don't have anything to say, like you're empty or maybe even weak. But the truth is, silence is one of the greatest strengths you can ever carry. In a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, fighting to be seen, the one who chooses to be silent stands out the most. And when it comes to prayer, that silence is not about emptiness, it's about power. Think about it. When a person is silent, they're not distracted by what the world wants to throw at them. They're not moved by the noise outside. They're focused. They're in control. The loudest people in the room may grab your attention for a moment, but it's the ones who master silence that end up carrying the most influence. Why? Because silence means discipline. Silence means you've trained your soul not to be swayed by every voice around you. When Muslims bow their heads in prayer, even in the middle of a crowd, even when everything around them is alive with movement and sound, they choose silence. They whisper, not shout. They speak softly, not for the people nearby, but for the Creator who knows their hearts. That's not weakness, that's strength. It takes strength to keep your words measured. It takes strength to close yourself off from the noise around you. And it takes strength to connect in stillness when everything around you is pulling at your attention. Let me ask you something. How many times have you felt like the world was too loud for you to even think? Like your thoughts were drowning under the constant noise? Phones ringing, people talking, music blasting, social media feeding you content every second of the day, noise everywhere. But when you finally found a quiet space, even for just a moment, didn't you feel your chest relax? Didn't you feel clarity returning? That right there, that's the power of silence. Now imagine carrying that silence with you even in the middle of the noise. Imagine being able to bow your head, close your eyes, and block out everything else because your soul is focused on something higher. That's what prayer in silence is about. You don't need the world to hear you when the one who created the world already does. And that's what too many of us forget. We think the louder we are, the more powerful we become. We think being noticed by people makes us stronger. But power isn't in being noticed. Power is in being unshakable. Power is in being able to kneel down, whisper your truth, and know it's enough, because you're speaking directly to the one who matters most. And let me tell you something else. Silence builds resilience. It teaches you to be okay with not getting the approval of the crowd. It shows you that you don't need applause, you don't need validation, you don't need the world to clap for you to stand strong. The one who prays in silence in a crowd is proving to themselves and to everyone else, I don't need the world's attention. I don't need your noise. I'm connected to something greater. That is strength. So when you see someone praying in silence, don't mistake it for shyness. Don't mistake it for weakness. Don't think it's a lack of confidence. That quietness, that calm, disciplined silence is louder than any shout could ever be. It's louder because it's focused. It's louder because it's pure. It's louder because it carries weight. And maybe, just maybe, that's something we all need to learn. Because let's be honest, we've all had moments where we spoke just to be heard, not because we had anything meaningful to say. We've all raised our voices in a room just to prove we belonged. But what happens when you don't need to prove it anymore? What happens when you're confident enough, strong enough, grounded enough to let silence do the talking? That's when you discover real power. So I'll tell you, this silence is not the absence of strength. Silence is the very proof of it. And if you can find your silence, if you can stand strong in it, then the noise of the world will never shake you. Now I want you to think about this. Where in your life do you need that silence? Where do you need to stop shouting for attention and start whispering in strength? Because maybe, just maybe, the strongest move you'll ever make is learning to be silent in a world that never stops talking. Prayer is not for the crowd. It was never meant to be a performance. Too many times we live in a world that tells us everything we do has to be seen, has to be validated, has to be shared, liked, or applauded. But prayer is the opposite of that. Prayer doesn't need an audience. Prayer doesn't need recognition. It is personal, it is private, it is for the soul. And when someone bows their head and prays in silence, even when surrounded by people, what they're showing is that this connection was never meant for anybody else but the one who gave them life. Think about how the world works today. Everything has become a show. People go on social media to prove they're happy, to prove they're successful, to prove they're strong. But the truth is, a lot of it is just for the crowd, not for themselves. We chase likes, we chase comments, we chase attention. And yet when it comes to prayer, there's no camera, no spotlight, no stage, just you and the Creator. And that's the purity of it. That's the purity of it. When Muslims pray, especially in silence, what they're doing is stripping away the need for anyone else's validation. They're not saying those words for the person standing next to them. They're not lowering their heads for the approval of a neighbor. They're doing it because their soul craves that conversation. And when you realize that your soul is more important than the crowd, you begin to see that prayer was never supposed to be about being seen. It was always about being real. You know what's powerful? The fact that you can be surrounded by people who don't understand what you're saying, who don't even notice you're whispering those words, and still your prayer holds weight. Because it's not the people you're talking to. It's not the crowd you're trying to reach. It's the Almighty. And that quiet prayer carries more force than any loud speech shouted into the world. Let me put it this way. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is laughing, talking, living loud, but you feel alone? You feel like something's missing. That's because connection doesn't come from the crowd. Connection comes from something deeper. The same is true with prayer. If prayer were for the people, the moment they weren't watching, the prayer would lose its meaning. But because prayer is for the soul, even if nobody is there, even if you're all alone in the middle of the night, whispering in the dark, it still matters. It still counts. It still carries you. And that's why Muslims pray in silence even when surrounded. Because they're not worried about how it looks. They're not putting on a show. They're not saying, look at me. They're saying, hear me, God, know me, forgive me, guide me. Yeah. That's real, that's raw, and that's powerful. But here's the problem. Too many of us spend our lives chasing the crowd. We pray for people to notice us, to accept us, to validate us. And every time we do that, we lose a piece of ourselves. The soul doesn't want applause, it wants peace. The soul doesn't want attention, it wants connection. And that's why silent prayer, prayer that is meant only for the Creator, is so beautiful. It feeds the soul instead of the ego. So don't ever think prayer is wasted because the world doesn't see it. Don't think it's small just because it isn't loud. Some of the most powerful moments you'll ever have will be the ones nobody else knows about. The tears you shed when no one is watching. The whispers you make in the middle of the night. The prayers you say when your heart is heavy, but your lips barely move. That's where the strength is. That's where healing happens. That's where transformation begins. So understand this prayer is not for the crowd. It's not about what they see. It's not about how they judge. It's not about whether they applaud or ignore you. It's about the one-to-one conversation you have with your Creator. And when you finally realize that, you'll stop living for the people around you and start living for the one who gave you breath. Now I'll leave you with this question. Are you praying for the crowd or are you praying for your soul? Because the day you stop performing for the world and start connecting in truth is the day your life changes forever. Life is full of noise. It's full of distractions. Every day you wake up and something is pulling at you. Notifications on your phone, people calling your name, responsibilities piling up, and the weight of everything you've got to carry. The world doesn't make it easy to focus. It doesn't make it easy to stay centered. But discipline is about learning how to stay steady in the middle of all that chaos. And nowhere is that more visible than in the way Muslims pray silently, even when the whole world around them feels loud. Think about what it takes to drop everything, even for a moment, and bow your head in prayer. It takes discipline, because the world will tell you, not now, you're too busy. Not now, people are watching. Not now, there's too much going on. But discipline says, I don't care what's going on outside. I know what has to happen inside. And that's why praying in silence is so powerful, because it's proof that you can focus on what matters even when the noise of life is at its loudest. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to move faster, chase harder, never stop, never pause. And yet prayer is the pause. Prayer is the discipline that says, I can stop. I can step away from the noise. I can humble myself in silence and connect to something greater. That's not easy, because everything in this world is designed to keep you distracted, to keep you chasing. But when you can pause and pray in silence, Even in the middle of a crowd, you're proving that the world doesn't control you. You control yourself. And you know what discipline does? It frees you. Because when you have discipline, you don't need the world to set your rhythm. You set it yourself. You're no longer reacting to every distraction, every sound, every pull. You choose where your energy goes. And when your energy goes into prayer, even if the crowd is loud, even if life is heavy, you still find peace. That's the reward of discipline. Now let's be real. Most of us struggle with focus. You sit down to do one thing and 10 other things come knocking. Your phone buzzes, you check it. Someone calls your name, you answer. Something flashes across your screen and you get pulled in. And before you know it, the thing that really mattered never even got done. But discipline is what teaches you to say no. Discipline is what allows someone to pray in silence and not get pulled by the noise of the crowd. They've trained their soul to stay locked on what matters most. There's a lesson in that for all of us. Because if you can focus in prayer, if you can find silence in chaos, you can carry that same discipline into the rest of your life. You can learn to stay steady when the world shakes. You can learn to keep your peace when others lose theirs. You can learn to silence distractions when your purpose is calling. That's not just about prayer, that's about life. And let me tell you something, discipline doesn't come easy. It's not something you just wake up with. It's something you build, step by step, day by day, choice by choice. Every time someone chooses to bow their head and pray, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the noise, they're building discipline. They're training themselves not to be moved by the world, but to be guided by something higher. That's why prayer is more than a ritual. It's practice. It's training for life. Because think about it. If you can stand in a crowd where everyone else is talking, laughing, moving, and you can close your eyes, whisper your prayer, and not lose focus, then what else can shake you? What else can distract you? That kind of discipline doesn't stay on the prayer mat. It follows you everywhere. It shapes the way you handle challenges, the way you face temptations, the way you rise above the noise of life. So don't underestimate the power of discipline in silence. Don't underestimate what it means to stay focused when everything is pulling you in another direction. That's not weakness, that's mastery. That's not isolation, that's strength. And if you can learn that lesson from prayer, you can take it into every area of your life. Now let me ask you this, what's distracting you right now? What noise has been keeping you from focusing on what truly matters? Because until you build the discipline to silence the world and focus your soul, you'll always feel pulled in every direction. But the day you decide to choose silence, to choose focus, to choose discipline, that's the day everything changes for you. There's something powerful about a whisper. A whisper isn't about volume, it's about intention. When someone whispers to you, you lean in closer. You focus, you pay attention because whispers aren't meant for everyone. They're meant for the one listening. That's what prayer is. It's a whisper to the Creator. It's not about filling the room with sound, it's about filling the heart with connection. And when Muslims pray in silence, moving their lips softly, speaking words that only God can hear, that whisper is the loudest voice in their life at that moment. You see, prayer doesn't need to be shouted. Because the one you're speaking to doesn't need the noise. He already knows what's in your heart before you even say it. The whisper is just a way of showing sincerity. It's a private exchange, a sacred dialogue. The world doesn't have to hear it, because the world can't answer it. Only the Creator can. And I think that's what makes silent prayer so powerful, because it forces you to be real. When nobody else can hear what you're saying, you don't perform. You don't pretend. You don't polish your words to impress anybody. You speak from the heart, raw and honest, because you know the one you're talking to doesn't need a show. He wants the truth. And in those whispers, you find freedom. Freedom to admit your weaknesses, freedom to express your gratitude, freedom to cry without shame, freedom to be vulnerable. Because that whisper isn't for the crowd, it's for the one who already knows you better than you know yourself. Think about the difference between speaking to people and speaking to God. When we speak to people, we adjust our words. We measure them, filter them, try to make them sound right. We worry about being judged, misunderstood, criticized. But when we whisper in prayer, there's no judgment, no misunderstanding, just acceptance, just mercy, just guidance. That's why the whisper matters. It's the most honest version of you. Now imagine that. Imagine being in a crowd, noise all around you, distractions everywhere, and still finding that quiet space within yourself to whisper your truth. That's not weakness, that's strength. Because while the world is trying to grab your attention, you're giving your attention to the one who matters most. While the noise is demanding your energy, you're preserving it for your Creator. That's the discipline, that's the focus, and that's the beauty of silent prayer. But let's go deeper. The whisper isn't just about words, it's about presence. When someone whispers to you, it's usually because they're close. You don't whisper across a stadium, you whisper to someone right beside you. Silent prayer is like that. It's not about shouting across the universe, hoping God hears you. It's about knowing He's close enough to hear your softest whisper. That closeness is what makes the prayer powerful. That closeness is what gives the whisper its weight. And if you've ever experienced that, you know how grounding it is. Because the moment you whisper those words, you feel a peace that no noise around you can break. You realize you don't have to fight to be heard. You don't have to raise your voice above the chaos. You don't have to prove yourself. You just whisper, and he hears you. That's the kind of connection that changes lives. We spend so much of our energy shouting into the world, trying to make people listen, trying to prove our worth, trying to be recognized. But prayer reminds us that the most important conversation we'll ever have doesn't require shouting. It requires sincerity. And sincerity doesn't need volume, it doesn't need performance. It just needs truth. So when you see someone praying silently, whispering words you can't hear, understand that you're witnessing a conversation beyond this world. You're witnessing strength. You're witnessing humility. You're witnessing a heart that knows where to turn when the world gets loud. That whisper is more powerful than any speech, more comforting than any song, more real than any applause. Because that whisper is eternal. And maybe that's something we all need to learn. Because sometimes we think we have to shout to be heard, scream to be noticed, talk louder just to matter. But maybe the secret is in the whisper. Maybe the strength is in the silence. Maybe the truth is found not in how loud we can be, but in how honest we can be when nobody else is listening. So I'll leave you with this. When was the last time you whispered your truth? When was the last time you pushed the noise of the world aside and spoke softly, sincerely, without worrying who was watching? Because the day you find that whisper is the day you'll realize you were never unheard. Humility and sincerity. Two qualities this world doesn't talk about enough. See, we live in a culture where pride is celebrated, where ego is dressed up like success, and where people are taught that the louder they are, the more important they must be. But prayer flips all of that upside down. Prayer teaches you that real strength isn't in raising yourself higher, it's in bowing lower. Real strength isn't in trying to prove how much you are, but in admitting how much you need. And that's why silent prayer is so powerful, because it's not about showing off, it's about stripping away the show until only sincerity is left. When someone prays quietly, when their lips move but you can't hear the words, that's humility. They're not saying, "Look at me, look how devoted I am." They're saying, "This moment isn't for you, it's between me and my Lord." And that right there, that's sincerity. Because the moment you start praying for the people around you, the purity of that prayer is gone. But when you pray in silence, when only God can hear you, there's no pride left to hold on to. There's no ego in that moment, just truth. Now, humility is something we've forgotten in this age. Everybody wants to be seen, everybody wants to be recognized, everybody wants their effort to be noticed. But here's the thing, the Creator doesn't need you to broadcast your devotion to Him. He doesn't need your performance. He doesn't need your loud voice. What He asks for is your heart. And the heart speaks loudest when it speaks in honesty, when it speaks in humility, when it speaks without trying to impress anyone else. That's what silent prayer captures. And sincerity, let's talk about that. Sincerity is rare. You can fake almost anything in front of people. You can fake confidence, fake kindness, fake devotion. But you can't fake sincerity with God, because He knows when your heart is in it and when it isn't. And that's why those quiet, humble moments matter so much. They're the ones where you can't pretend. You can't fake it when no one else is listening. The whisper you make in prayer, the tear you shed in silence, that's sincerity in its purest form. Think about the act of bowing down in prayer. That's humility on display. You're lowering yourself physically and spiritually to say, "I am not greater than you. I am not in control. I need you." And when you do that silently, it goes even deeper. Because now it's not just your body that's lowered, it's your ego. You're not worried about the world hearing your words. You're focused only on being genuine. That's the kind of prayer that transforms people from the inside out. And here's something powerful. Humility and sincerity are the foundations of trust. When you humble yourself before God and speak sincerely, you're showing trust. You're saying, "I don't need the crowd to understand me," because you already do. "I don't need the world to validate me," because you've already accepted me. That's why silent prayer feels so freeing. It releases you from the weight of trying to impress anyone else. But humility isn't weakness. Don't get it confused. It takes strength to be humble. It takes strength to kneel when pride tells you to stand tall. It takes strength to admit you're not in control when the world tells you to act like you've got it all together. Humility is not about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking beyond yourself. And prayer trains you to do that. Every time you pray in silence, you're reminding yourself that life isn't about your ego. It's about your purpose. And sincerity, real sincerity, takes courage too. Because sincerity means you're being vulnerable. You're not hiding behind a mask. You're not putting on a show. You're letting your real self come forward, flaws and all. And that's scary sometimes. But in prayer, in those moments of silence, you can be fully sincere because you know you're speaking to the one who won't reject you. You're speaking to the one who already knows your weaknesses and loves you anyway. So don't underestimate what silent prayer teaches us. It teaches us to strip away pride. It teaches us to let go of ego. It teaches us to speak truth without performance. It teaches us that humility is not weakness and sincerity is not fragility. They are strength. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what the world is missing. We've got too much pride, too much noise, too much performance. What we need more of is humility and sincerity. And prayer and silence is the reminder that those two things are not just important, they're essential. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you prayed without worrying who was watching? When was the last time you were truly sincere without ego, without pride, without performance? Because that moment right there, that kind of prayer, that kind of humility, that's the moment your soul feels free. The loudest message in this life is not always the one that comes with a shout. It's not always the one that fills a room or the one that gets the most attention. Sometimes the loudest message is silence. And that's exactly why Muslims pray in silence, even in the middle of noise. Because silence speaks in a way that words never can. Silence has a power that cuts deeper than volume. And when you see someone bowing their head, lips moving softly, no performance, no show, that silence is sending a message stronger than anything the crowd could ever shout. We live in a world that thinks the louder you are, the more you matter. That if you raise your voice high enough, if you put yourself out there loud enough, people will respect you. But volume doesn't equal value. Just because something's loud doesn't mean it's true. Just because the world hears it doesn't mean it has weight. But silence, that's where the truth lives. That's where sincerity is. That's where the strongest messages are carried. Think about it. Have you ever been in an argument where someone stopped talking and their silence said more than 1,000 words ever could? That quiet pause carried more power than all the shouting, because silence has a weight to it. It forces people to pay attention. It forces reflection. And in prayer, silence works the same way. Silent prayer carries the loudest message. It says, "This is between me and my Creator, and nothing else matters." And here's the thing, silence cuts through noise. You can shout in a noisy world, and your voice will still get lost in the mix. But silence rises above. Because silence doesn't compete with the noise, it stands apart from it. That's what makes silent prayer so powerful in a world that never stops talking. While everything else is loud and distracted, silence says, "I am grounded, I am focused, I am connected." That message is louder than anything else going on around it. Now think about how we live today. Everywhere you look, someone is trying to be louder, louder on social media, louder in conversations, louder improving themselves. But here's the truth. The people with the most influence are often the ones who don't need to raise their voices. Their actions, their presence, their calmness, it speaks louder than any noise they could make. Silent prayer is like that. It speaks through humility. It speaks through consistency. It speaks through focus. And it doesn't need volume to be powerful. There's also another side to this. Silence protects the purity of the message. When you pray quietly, you're not performing for the people around you. You're not trying to sound impressive. You're not dressing up your words to look holy. You're being raw, honest, sincere. And that honesty is what makes the prayer powerful. Because in that silence, there's no mask, no audience, no performance. Just truth. And truth, even whispered, carries more weight than 1,000 shouts of pretense. The world may never hear the words of that silent prayer, but the one who needs to hear them already has. And that's what makes silence so loud. Because it's not about how many people are listening. It's about who's listening. And when the one listening is the Creator of the heavens and the earth, then silence becomes the most powerful voice of all. And let's be honest, we could use more of that silence because our lives are filled with too much noise. We're drowning in it, and all that noise distracts us, pulls us, weakens us. But silence centers us. Silence heals us. Silence gives us the space to hear what really matters. Silent prayer teaches us to find that stillness, that clarity, that strength in the middle of the noise. And when you find it, you realize you were never without a voice. You were just speaking to the one who always heard you. So don't ever underestimate the power of silence. Don't think it's small just because it's quiet. Silence can shake a soul. Silence can carry truth. Silence can transform lives. And prayer in silence, it sends the loudest message of all, that faith is not about being seen, it's about being real. Now let me leave you with this. What is your silence saying when the noise of the world surrounds you? Are you letting it drown you, or are you letting your silence speak louder? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever say is the thing you never say out loud. So when you step back and look at it all, you realize something. Silence isn't weakness, it's strength. Prayer isn't for the crowd, it's for the soul. Discipline isn't about controlling the world, it's about mastering yourself. The whisper of prayer isn't small, it's intimate. Humility and sincerity aren't losses, they're victories of the heart. And silence can be the loudest message of all. That's why Muslims pray in silence even when surrounded by people. Because the real power isn't in being heard by the crowd, it's in being heard by the Creator. The real strength isn't in noise, it's in focus. The real victory isn't in pride, it's in humility. And maybe that's the lesson we all need right now. In a world that never stops talking, we need to remember how to be still. In a world obsessed with being seen, we need to remember what it means to be sincere. And in a world that measures strength by volume, we need to remember that the quietest prayer can carry the greatest power. So I'll leave you with this. When the world gets loud, will you get louder with it, or will you choose silence that speaks louder than any noise? Because the moment you find that silence, the moment you bow your head and let your soul whisper, that's the moment everything changes.